Hello everybody, it's Peter McLaughlin with BlueSky Hypnosis, and welcome again to a Friday Live at 5. I'm so glad that you're here joining us. If it's your first time, or even if you've been here before, one of the things I always like to say at the beginning is please, please, please be sure to ask questions. Put it in the comments section in the chat bar. It always makes the presentation, in my opinion, way more interesting. It's way more fun for me to do when there's some kind of dialogue going back and forth. A lot of times people will ask questions I hadn't really considered. It'll take the broadcast into a whole new direction. And also too, if ideas occur to you during this broadcast or afterwards about future Live at 5s, topics that you would like to see here, please be sure to submit those as well, because that really, really helps me a lot. I want to do it every week. That's 52 a year. And I'm just not that creative. So if you can help me with coming up with ideas, which some of you have already done, I really appreciate that. So today's topic is, are you being programmed? Are you being subconsciously programmed? And I want to talk about some of the different ways in which that may be occurring. We're going to explore what hypnosis is, because hypnosis is a big part of subconscious programming or subconscious persuasion. And we're going to talk about different methods by which people maybe that are in the advertising industry or in politics or in other realms could actually be influencing your decisions. I love this topic. I think it's endlessly fascinating, but I am a hypnosis nerd. So thanks for joining, and keep those comments and questions coming. So I want to start today with one man who is widely considered to be the father of modern public relations, modern advertising, and modern propaganda. In fact, he wrote a book in the 1920s called Propaganda. And supposedly Joseph Goebbels, who was Hitler's minister of propaganda, an expert in his evil craft, supposedly he carried around this book called Propaganda by Edward Bernays all through World War II. Now, the very interesting thing about Edward Bernays is his family connections. Most notably, his uncle was Sigmund Freud. And so Bernays took a lot of Freud's insights and understandings and kind of twisted those around so that he could achieve his ends. And one of the things that I find kind of the most sort of dastardly interesting and brilliant in a really kind of twisted sense is something that Bernays did for one of his clients, which was manufacturers of cigarettes. So he realized at some point that half the population, this is now the 1920s, so it's the era of the suffrage movement, the women's suffrage movements. So women didn't have the vote even, and women were desperately trying to achieve some kind of parity with men and to get the right to vote. And this was the big issue of the day. Now, one of the keys about how all the elements of this story come together is that at that time in the 1920s, smoking a cigarette was considered unladylike. So Bernays steps back and he looks at the marketplace and he says, well, if I could get women to smoke, I could double the income of my client, this tobacco manufacturer. And so Bernays believed that the way you persuade people is that you find out what their deeper belief systems are, what their deeper emotions are, and then you harness that for your own purposes. So you see a train going in that direction, you want to go in that direction, and you find a way to hop on that train. So knowing that women represented 50% increase in the market share of smokers, and knowing that women wanted more than anything to have parity with men, they wanted to be equal, he arranged for marches to occur where he relabeled the cigarettes freedom torches. And women could express their equality to men by walking down the street smoking cigarettes. Now, Bernays obviously didn't give a whit about the rights of women. He didn't care about that at all. All he cared about was manipulating half of the population to smoke cigarettes so that he could improve the profits of the company that he worked for. And I talk about Bernays because I believe as I said before, that he's kind of the father of modern public relations, the father of modern advertising, and the father of modern propaganda and propaganda techniques. So one of his statements, which I thought was absolutely chilling, and I just want to pull it up here, is he said, let me just move this out of the way, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic societies." Now he goes on with that quote, but basically what he's saying is that a tiny, tiny group of influential people, at the time it was influential men, are essentially molding what the rest of us think we want. But really, it's what they want. And I would submit that this is happening in every aspect of our culture, most notably in anything that involves selling, so anything that involves, say, advertising, for example, and most specifically within the realm of politics. And as we know, advertising spends billions and billions and billions, of dollars, and we know they wouldn't spend that money if it didn't work. Now, one of the things about advertising that when I was doing sales training, because I wrote a book on sales and subconscious persuasion, and for a while I worked in different corporations and I would do these trainings. One of the things that I would always do is I would show a pharmaceutical advertisement. And we all know that the Food and Drug Administration requires the pharmaceutical company to reveal all the possible side effects of what can happen if you take their drug. And I picked just sort of a random drug. I can't remember what it was exactly, but I wrote, I listened to it over and over again, and I wrote out all the side effects. And the side effects included things like, well, you've heard this before, right? Like you could have, high blood pressure, you could have a heart attack, you could lose your memory, you could have a stroke, you can die, you can have your throat swell shut, it can affect your vision. And so I would play this 30 to 60 second ad for the people in the class, and all of these things are being said. And then I would ask them a question. I would say, can you imagine if in order to sell a ladder, or in order to sell a swimming pool, or in order to sell a hamburger, you had to reveal all the nasty things that could happen to you, like falling from the ladder and breaking your neck, or you could get brain damage, or all these other things? Why would you run the ad if you have to say all of these horrible things about the possible side effects that occur with the sale of your product? The FDA requires them to do that, but they don't require them to advertise. And advertising is kind of dominated by that one particular industry. And I would say, why does it work? Well, the answer is we're going to come back to the answer later in terms of why we're going to I'm going to mess up that word. It's going to be a tangential connection to the answer I'm going to give you now as to why this is important, and why it's important with some other aspects, like how do you protect yourself against all of this? So the answer is that most human communication is nonverbal. It's what your body's doing when you're communicating, and it's what your voice is doing when you're communicating that spreads the vast majority of the meaning. So if I were a receptionist in a doctor's office and you came in and I turned my back to you and I said, "Welcome to Dr. Jones's office, sit down and I'll blah, 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 and I hope you're having a good day," you'd probably be rightly offended. And if the doctor called me on the carpet and said, "Mrs. Jones said that you were rude to her," I'd say, "I just said, welcome to Dr. Jones's office, please sit down and we'll call you when he's ready." But the meaning of my communication had way more to do with my body language, turning my back to her, and the quality, the tone, the pitch, the inflection, the timbre, etc. of my voice. And so in those commercials, what they generally do is, while they're saying all of those side effects, and it's usually in a very soothing, calm, rational, comforting voice, they're showing you images of a very well-kept suburban neighborhood at night when everything is peaceful and quiet. Or they're showing you an image of a beautiful beach And a very, 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 very healthy looking couple with smiles on their faces is walking along the beach. And then there's music in the background, like some kind of feel-good tune from the 1960s. And all of these elements come together to create the real meaning of what's being communicated rather than the facts. So advertising for a long time, like in the 20s, used to be about the facts. Like if you buy this vehicle, here are all the facts about it. If you buy this bread, here are all the facts about that bread. And what was learned through psychology at some point was that's not why people buy things. They buy things because of how they want to feel when they purchase the product. So if we can understand what they want to feel, we can then sell to that emotion. We can sell to that deeper sense of meaning or need or fear. These psychologists in the 1950s were called depth, D-E-P-T-H, depth psychologists. And they came on the heels of Edward Bernays and his work. And that's why when you see an ad now, it might just say, just do it. They're not telling you anything about the product. That's not their intention. So Bernays, I think, is really important to start thinking about because he went beyond merely influencing public opinion for the sake of selling more cigarettes or whatever product he was working on. And he went into what it says in that quote, which is the control of society, which he said is an essential element of a democratic society. And I go, wait a second, isn't a democratic society supposed to be we are all bringing our own opinions, attitudes, needs, wants, dreams, hopes into the polling place and then choosing based on that. And so we get kind of an amalgam or a consensus of what everybody desires and wants, and that's represented in a particular politician. And he's like, no, it's a small group of us that's going to decide the direction of the society. And then through these techniques, we are going to manipulate the masses to make the choice we want them to make. And if you guys are interested in this topic, just look up Mentalist on YouTube. Darren Brown, D-E-R-R-E-N, Darren Brown is somebody I love to watch. He's like probably the best mentalist in the world, but there are many, many, many others. I watched one about a week or two ago where this mentalist and the people that he was interacting with didn't know he was a mentalist. And they brought in three or four very well-known social media influencers. And he was kind of making it seem like he just wanted to learn from them, you know, how they do what they do. And he doesn't really know that much because he's a suburban dad and blah, 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 blah. Well, through something, and I'll explain what this word means in a moment, through priming them subconsciously, which means they were not aware of what he was doing, priming them subconsciously, they all made the same choices in this creative realm, these creative people making these creative choices, because he asked them to go off and, you know, create a picture and take promote an object and all these other things, and they all made the same choices. And at the end, they're totally blown away by, you know, my God, how did you do this? The answer is that he manipulated them subconsciously without their knowledge. And these are obviously intelligent, sophisticated people who are very successful in social media being influencers. So this term that I use called priming, what priming means, and I think I made something here to, so we got Bernays, he's gone, priming, here we go. All right, priming. So I show a pump here because it's used in mechanical circles. To prime something means you get it to the point where now water starts to flow and then it just starts to flow continuously, but you got to pump the handle for a while to prime the pump. That's where that phrase comes from. In any event, this concept in psychology of priming has been studied pretty extensively from what I could see when I was researching for my book. And a lot of the research was done at New York University. And what they did in these studies was that they would take groups of college students, random groups of college students, 20 or so, and they would give group A, the test group, word jumbles, and 50% of the words in the word jumbles would be something that would be indicative of aging and the elderly. So it could be cane, words like cane, words like bingo, words like Florida, senior, words like that. Other 50% of the words were neutral. And then they had another group, the control group, and they were given all neutral words as word jumbles. Now, these people obviously didn't know what was going on. What the researchers wanted to figure out was, would the control group behave any differently as they walked from test station number 1 to test station number 2? And the results were astonishing. The control group had no difference in the speed at which they walked from test station 1 to test station 2, test station 2 to test station 3. But the test group that was primed with these words suggestive of being elderly and aging walked 30, 40, 50% slower from test station 1 to test station 2. And the only variable were these words that they were primed with. Same thing has been done with test scores. One group gets primed with words that are suggestive of college professors. The other group is primed with 50% of the words, which is suggestive of hooligans. This was perhaps done in Europe, where hooligan is the word, for like miscreant or something or whatever. Anyway, the test scores were lopsided. And these are, people tested, chosen at random. So the group that was primed with the words suggestive of professor and success and all these other things scored significantly higher on their test results than did the other group. So what the mentalist is doing is that he is subconsciously priming these 3 or 4 influencers with pictures, with the spoken word, with colors, so that they think they're making a conscious, rational choice, but they're all making the exact same choice. And at the end, they're like, oh my God, how did you do that? So I think these give us like little windows into the power of subconscious persuasion and subconscious programming. So what I want to do now is I want to turn to what some people are commenting on, and we'll see if we can, if there's some questions in there that I can answer. Okay, so Beth and Dara both said that they saw Darren. So Dara, you saw him live in Cork City, you said, in Ireland. Yeah, he's quite an entertainer. Amazing. Let's see. Let's pull this one in here. A Diamond. It will be most effective when you're on the fence about it and feel like you were getting a limited time good deal. Thinking it through. Do I really need this? Is this actually such a great deal? Okay, so you bring up a really good point. One of the things that I want to talk about are the principles of persuasion. And these are things that are sort of hardwired into our brains. So one of the easiest ways to understand what these principles are and how they're hardwired into our brains is the principle of the peer group. So there's a reason why advertisers will use the phrase 4 out of 5 Americans use this product, or 8 out of 10 doctors prefer, because they're harnessing the principle of the peer group. Now, in your mind for a moment, take yourself back in time to when we were living in caves, prehistoric man and prehistoric woman. You want to know if the stream in this area you've just, hiked or walked to if the water is safe for you to drink. So you sit back up on the side of the hill and you just watch all day long. and other people walk down to the stream and they bend over and they drink from the water, and you're watching them as they're leaving and they look okay, and then more people come down and drink from the stream and they look okay, and someone else drinks from the stream, and then someone else comes over and says, hey, aren't you thirsty? The water tastes really good. But you're really kind of cautious, and so you just wait a little bit longer to see if anyone starts vomiting or anything, and within a certain amount of time everybody looks fine, so now you know that water is safe to drink. This is kind of hardwired into our brains, and our brains are programmed, if you will, to look for shortcuts. Because always having to do everything yourself makes things very, very slow and cumbersome. And if your friend has used a product or service and it's gone really well for them, that hardwired part of your brain that says, well, my peer used it and I trust my peer, therefore this product or service must be valuable. I must be able to use this. One of the other ones that A. Diamond is talking about is scarcity. So scarcity is also hardwired in our brains. If we go into a store, and I grew up in the Northeast, and in the Northeast, every time there was going to be a snowstorm, you wouldn't, some people here probably are from there. You know what I'm talking about. Like the weather forecaster says, hey, there's a big storm coming in tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. And so what happens is that the grocery stores are cleaned out. All the bread, all the milk, all the eggs. And the hardware stores are cleaned out of all the shovels, all the snow blowers, and all of the salt that you throw down on the ground. Now, you would think that no one living in these areas that gets plenty of snow every single winter had any shovels at home, that their cupboards and kitchens were completely bare. But part of what's going on is this principle of the peer group, right? Everyone's running out and buying all this stuff, so it must be important for me to do that too. Now, this is all happening subconsciously. And when I get to the grocery store and I see, oh my God, half the bread is gone, that principle of scarcity comes in. If I don't get this now, it may be gone forever. Marketers understand this, and as A. Diamond is talking about, we can also have scarcity of time. That's why time is frequently used when it comes to things like a sale, right? The sale will end on Sunday. After that, it's going right back up to the higher price. This is a concept that is used along with the other principles of influence over and over and over again. So thank you, A. Diamond, for adding that to the conversation. Okay, so Susanna Cousteau. Commercials are not even that dangerous. Fake news are/is. Okay, so what I'm going to try to do, and the people who know me are going to laugh at me right now because I'm a big person. I'm a person who loves to stand on a soapbox. You can obviously tell that right now. What I want to try to do is I want to try to be sort of apolitical and just talk about these facts, what I know to be facts. And you guys, please research them yourself. There is something called the Smith-Mundt Act, M-U-N-D-T, Smith-Mundt Act. And the Smith-Mundt Act basically said the US government is not allowed to use propaganda/information warfare directed against the American people. And the fact is, in 2013, that law was repealed. Now, I have to wonder why the US government, like what would be the legitimate reason that they would decide that they want to repeal that law, thus giving themselves the legal clearance to wage information warfare against the American people, propaganda. So what some people call fake news may not actually be fake news. What some people call fake news undoubtedly is fake news. But underneath it all is this very curious and interesting fact about why did the US government repeal the Smith-Mundt Act. I don't really know why they did it, but they did it, and that kind of seems important to me. Also, there's a CIA program, I think that was launched maybe in the 60s. I could be wrong about that. It could be a little earlier, it could be a little later, called Operation Mockingbird. And Operation Mockingbird was an effort to co-opt or take over American news outlets so that points of view, stories, and so forth that were things that elements within the US government wanted promulgated to the American public would flow through and into the American public. I don't know if it was part of Operation Mockingbird, but certainly the two North Vietnamese destroyers that were alleged to have attacked the USS Maddox, which led to the massive enlargement of the United States' involvement in the Vietnam War. It turned out many years later that that attack never happened, even though it was reported as having happened. If you're interested in this, you can watch a documentary called The Fog of War with Robert McNamara, who was the Secretary of Defense at the time. And he talks a little bit about that as well. Now, was that fake news? It sure seems like it in hindsight, but I don't know if it was sort of a mistake, like an honest mistake, or if it was designed to produce a particular policy response or outcome. So thank you, Susanna. Appreciate that. All right, so Camila says, and I'll just pop it up right here. Camila H says, so many of those commercials show people smiling and having leisure time. Yeah, absolutely, because what they're trying to link in your mind is they're trying to link in your mind their product and that outcome. And they're not saying necessarily, take this product and you'll be smiling and healthy and happy and, maybe be more attractive to the opposite sex, but that's absolutely what they are implying. And linking is another subconscious technique of persuasion. One of the ways of thinking about linking is a celebrity endorsement. For a while there, Tiger Woods was the greatest golfer in the United States, maybe in the world. And you could not go through a major airport without seeing picture after picture after picture after picture after picture of Tiger Woods representing, I think it was like accounting firms and other kinds of service companies. Now, obviously what they were doing, because really, what does Tiger Woods and a golfer have to do with accounting? Well, they'd probably say excellence. What they were really doing is they were linking his popularity, his familiarity, his appeal with themselves. It's like putting on the cloak of Tiger Woods so that when people thought of Accenture, they would think of Tiger Woods and they'd get this feeling like, oh man, I really love Tiger Woods. I really love Accenture. It's a fundamental aspect called linking. Hypnotists will use this too. Like sometimes if a person's having trouble with one aspect of their life, you'll ask them and find out, where did you have some big success in your life? And in their subconscious mind during hypnosis, you'll link the feelings of succeeding in this other aspect, in this other realm, with this area where you have heretofore been struggling. So there's different ways of thinking about linking, but certainly in advertising, the main way of thinking about it is the celebrity endorsement. And they pay a lot of money for that. Dara Sullivan, any half-truth said upon a need to influence is propaganda. This goes back a long time. Yeah, it does go back a long time. And I think there's something about propaganda that goes back to the early Catholic Church. People can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it does. It's something about, it's like propagation with gardening, propagating ideas in the minds of people. And yeah, that it does go back a long, long way. The difference is that with time and with a better understanding of how the human mind works and with technology. So being able to spread information from, say, the printing press was a giant leap forward in being able to spread ideas. Now, that's just power. It's just a tool. You could use it for good purposes or you could use it for bad purposes. And the printing press was this massive step forward in the ability to communicate on a wide scale. The next massive one was radio. Absolutely huge. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President Roosevelt, and his fireside chats by the radio, he was the first one to really utilize that new technology to communicate with the American people and with the world. And Hitler and Goebbels used the power of the radio Then came television, even more powerful than the radio, and then came the internet, even more power than that. So the insight and understanding about the human mind and how we tick alongside of this increase in technology has just accelerated the ability of propagandists to practice their dark arts. You know, it is just a tool, so it's also helped people who want to do good with it to do good with it as well. Let's see how. Here we go. MH. Can't think of his name, but didn't Freud's nephew use mind control, subconscious programming for advertising campaigns? Yeah, MH, you must have tuned in a little bit late, because I started off talking about the guy you're thinking about, Edward Bernays. He wrote the book Propaganda, and he's the father of modern advertising, the father of modern public relations, and arguably the father of modern subconscious persuasion when it comes to political campaigns and political initiatives, to get people to behave in ways that they think they're making a free choice, but really they're not. So yeah, absolutely. And Camila talks about the printing press, radio, and television. Absolutely. Okay, Christina Calliston talks about Marie Osmond for Nutrisystem. Yeah, so you go. There's a celebrity endorsement. You know, she had this image that dates back to the 70s of being beautiful and the girl next door and all of the attributes that go along with that. Honest and healthy and energetic. And so, yeah, Nutrisystems, it makes sense from that perspective that they would want to link their product with Marie Osmond and with her brand, because that's really what celebrities have created, is they have created a brand that appeals to certain people for certain reasons. And when they link those things together, they harness all of that value, all of those people that sort of Marie Osmond brings along with her. So yeah, very, very good. All right, so let's talk about some of the other ways of subconsciously persuading people. These are techniques, concepts that hypnotists are taught. Propagandists would definitely understand all of these techniques and probably many more. So I talked about the power of the peer group, how if everyone else is doing something, there's a powerful urge inside of us that says that thing is safe, that thing is desirable. I talked about scarcity, how we have something hardwired in our minds so that if time is running out, if that product has almost sold off the shelves, if you want to buy something on eBay and they say, you know, there were 10 available and now there's only one left, you've got that aspect of scarcity that kicks in, and you don't want to lose it in many cases. In fact, I used to talk about eBay all the time because an auction on eBay pits people against each other. And when people are pitted against each other like that, it harnesses the peer effect. If someone else thinks that's valuable, that has subconscious influence on me. And that clock is ticking down, ticking down, ticking down, ticking down, ticking down, ticking down. So you've got the scarcity of the time factor as well. Another powerful element of persuasion is repetition. Hypnosis is often considered to be a state of hyper learning. So I've mentioned this a few times before, but I want to say it again because there are some people that may not have heard it, and for the people who have, it's probably worth hearing again. That if a 5-year-old wants to learn to speak Italian, and I want to learn to speak Italian, and somebody who's 28 years old wants to learn to speak Italian, we know who's going to learn first, right? It's going to be the 5-year-old. Because 5-year-olds, we say, are like sponges. They absorb everything. They are in a state of hypnosis all the time. They are in a state of hyper learning all the time. And so if you want to persuade people, with adults, you need to get through this wall that is created between the ages of 7 and 9 years old called a critical factor or a critical faculty. Because back behind that wall is the subconscious mind. That's the province of emotions. That's where we do most of our brain processing. And that's where our preferences live. That's where our desires live, our wants and our fears. That's what they're selling to. And so to get back on the other side of that wall, one of the techniques that's used, in addition to the ones that I've already talked about, is repetition. If I bang hard enough and long enough against that door or that wall, that door opens up, and now I have access to the subconscious mind. So in advertising, it is said that that repetition makes reputation. It is said sometimes, and I don't know that this is a statistical truth, but it is a sort of common wisdom. There's something called the rule of 7 touches, that you have to present an idea at least 7 times to someone before it gets past that door through repetition and makes it into the subconscious mind. When you want to learn something, when you were in school, college, high school, and you wanted to learn something, you were taught to use the principle of repetition. Why? Because you needed to make that information or that ability, you needed to turn it into an unconscious competence. We say that's when you've really learned something, is that when it's unconsciously competent. You don't have to think about tying your shoes anymore, you just do it, because the technique for doing it has made it into your subconscious mind. When my first child was born, many years ago now, the nurse was trying to show me at the hospital how to put on a disposable diaper. And I'm telling you right now, this was absolutely, totally baffling to me, which is kind of embarrassing to say because it's not that hard to put on a disposable diaper, but it was all brand new to me and I was kind of like overwhelmed by the whole process, and I just looked at it and it just didn't make any sense. Well, like 3 days later, you're getting up in the middle of the night to change diapers, and I was doing it without being able to even see anything. I could probably still do it now without being able to see anything. It had become, through repetition, an unconscious competence. Through repetition, it opens that door wide open. So the other ways or other methods of subconscious persuasion would be authority. So an authority figure has a way of bypassing that critical factor, that doorway, in a way that just a regular, quote unquote, regular person doesn't have. If one of your friends says, you don't look too good today, are you feeling all right? That's one thing. But if a doctor in a lab coat says that to you, it's like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? I think I need to go in and get tests done. Now, this is also why advertisers will use authority figures or people dressed up as authority figures. Same thing in the military, same thing with politicians. They want to establish authority because the word of authority bypasses the critical factor. The doorway opens up, it goes directly into our subconscious mind, where we can take it on as a belief or even act upon it. Another one is emotion. So at times when we are at an emotional peak, we are very suggestible. Suggestible just means that door has opened up. You have entered a hypnotic state. Hypnotist doesn't have to be there, but you have entered a hypnotic state, a state of hyperlearning. And so in these moments of high emotion, it could be fear, and that's used a lot, I think, in propaganda. It could also be, you're laughing and you're having a really good time with your friends. That door has opened wide. Television advertising works for many different reasons. It repeats things over and over again. It advertises before, during, and after programming that evokes emotion. Advertisers will use authority figures like someone dressed up like a doctor. Politicians have their own thing with the flags behind them and the generals standing behind them and the police officers standing with them and so forth to establish authority. Authority has a way of passing right through. And then they will repeat these things over and over and over and over and over again. I mean, how many ads have you seen in your lifetime? I think it's like hundreds of thousands of ads that you've seen, just in your life. And then the last one that's sort of a kicker is that just watching television puts you into a hypnotic trance. You're watching a flickering image, even though your conscious mind can't see it, there is a flickering image that you're watching at a fixed distance. That tends to narrow and entrain the mind, and you enter a state that people will unconsciously describe accurately as, I want to veg out in front of the TV. I want to zone out in front of the TV. They're describing a hypnotic state. And the reason the TV is so powerful is it's using all 5 of these methods that I mentioned to you. And it's using some of the methods that I also mentioned that aren't part of the 5, like linking and scarcity. All of these things are being deployed to change your mind and to get you to do something or to not do something without you consciously being aware of it. So if you think of sort of the 4 big fast food outlets in the United States, and I don't think I have to name them, they all sell hamburgers. One of them sells pizza. They all use the same colors in their logos. It's like red and sort of a yellow or orange color. Now, did they all just sort of randomly land on those colors for their logos? And think of how much they spend on advertising, right? They spend a fortune coming up with those logos. Or were those colors picked on purpose because they have an influence on you? Well, I'm sure you understand by now they were picked for the latter reason. You know, you can look this up for yourself, but among other things, red excites. It actually raises your blood pressure. You know, they talk about the woman in the red dress, red lipstick, excitement. Well, excitement and increasing your appetite is what red does. These colors are studied because they're coming at you from all different directions. And I think it's really cool to understand this, because when you understand it, you can sometimes see through the curtain, understand what's happening, and become a bit more immune, if you will, to the effects of what the propagandists are attempting to do. Just looking at some other questions. I like this one. Jill Bates. I am not a real doctor, but I play one on TV. Awesome. I'm going to see if I can do it this week. We're going to give you an applause for that one. Woohoo! Okay. Are there any AW? Yes. Repetition is used to learn to play the piano. Yeah, AW, absolutely. Repetition is learned for everything. It's the cornerstone of our educational system, whether you are talking about, you know, public and private school, secondary school, primary school, college, beyond. It's all repetition. But I wonder what would happen if you added in some of the other elements. What if you were in a hypnotic state when you were being exposed to this information? What if you were being exposed to subliminal information while you were attending a lecture or whatever? What if you were being primed to get better scores on your tests? I have to imagine that as you add more elements in, the effectiveness just goes up. Excuse me for a second. So one of the things that I talked about in the little promo teaser thing was subliminals. So for those of you who don't know what that means, and I produce a number of subliminals on my YouTube channel, please remember to, let me just put that up there, okay? A little plug. Please remember to subscribe to my channel. Are subliminal tracks. So the way I make subliminal tracks is I usually have either a description introduction. Sometimes I also have an audible hypnotic induction that has within it hypnotic suggestions and messages which begin to program the mind audibly. And then that shifts, because it's designed to be used while you're sleeping, most of them, not all of them. It shifts to where all you hear at a certain point, maybe 10, 20 minutes in, is you just hear the sound of rain, or you just hear the sound, excuse me, of instrumental music. But what's happening underneath your conscious level to hear are all of those hypnotic suggestions for weight loss. You feel fully satisfied on 1/3 or on 2/3 of what you used to need to eat in order to feel satisfied. You love yourself. You find yourself drawn and craving clean water. And other suggestions like that to seed or program the subconscious mind for a healthy outcome. And it's all being done subliminally. So again, if you listen to the track, you probably won't be able to make out any of the words. Maybe when the music dips, you could hear sort of like a whispering sound. But that is an example of an audible subliminal, also called subaudible, below your conscious level of hearing it. But your subconscious mind drinks all of that in, it pulls all of that in. There's also subliminals that are subvisual. So you can flash an image on the screen so quickly and so briefly that the subconscious mind picks it up, but your conscious mind doesn't. You don't register seeing that, but your subconscious mind does, and it bypasses that critical faculty. The door opens and it goes right in. And if then you use repetition, which I use on all of my subliminal tracks, you use repetition and people listen to it every night, it really begins to influence the subconscious mind over time. And these are techniques that, I mean, I'm just a normal everyday citizen like you. Like, I can only imagine what government agencies have access to. It boggles my mind to think of what they can do if this is what I can do. You know, like what I can do is got to be just a fraction of the technology that they have available to them. Oh, here we go. Dara's got a question. So, question. I'm wondering, I am comfortable in hypnosis because I feel safe being open to suggestions, therefore feeling compliant, and my influencer can't get angry. Childhood trauma, maybe. Sounds like you're describing kind of like a Stockholm syndrome. That's where the victim starts to identify with the abductor or with the abuser. I don't know. I mean, I can say the part about being comfortable, with some exceptions, is important. So when I work with people one-on-one, either online or in my office, one of the first objectives is to get to a place where there is rapport between the client and me. In other words, the client has a subconscious feeling that they feel comfortable with me, they feel safe with me, they can trust me. Because at that point, once they have rapport, it's going to be easier for them to share important, sensitive details with me. It's going to be easier for them to relax. And therefore, when we get to the part about hypnotic suggestions or the other kind of work we do, it's just going to be much more seamless at that point. So the part about your question that I'm kind of keying in on, I guess, is the thing about being comfortable. I think that's really, really important. Now for you, exactly why you were comfortable in your childhood, like, you know, did acting compliant mean that you didn't get abused? That could be, right? And so that could have linked as a childhood strategy for survival. If I'm compliant, then everything is smooth and I feel safe. That is a possibility. So thanks for that question. Let's see where we are. Just want to see if there's any questions here that have come in recently. Okay, so here's MH. Haven't read it all, but I'll just pop it up here. MH, I was listening to your subliminal during the week while working. Do I need to have earphones in, or is it okay to just leave it playing away? Excellent question. Thank you for asking. I think, how about that sound? All right. This thing tickles me, I gotta say. Thank you for bearing with me. The ones that I make for work, I am assuming that the person is just gonna have it playing in the background. It's just gonna be playing in the background. So I've got weight loss for work. Just play it in the background. You don't need to have headphones or earbuds in. There are others that I make that would have something called binaural tones on them. Now, this is another subliminal way of influencing a person's mood. A binaural tone requires headphones or earbuds for it to work. And the way it works is it puts a tone in your left ear, a tone in your right ear, and those two tones are ever so slightly apart in terms of their frequency. You can't consciously hear the difference between these two tones. But your mind, your subconscious mind knows there's something going on here that's a little bit different in the left and the right. So what it does is it creates a third tone. It manufactures a third tone, which is halfway between left ear and right ear. And you tend to entrain, meaning your mind and your brain tends to move to that frequency, and you move more deeply into a hypnotic state. So if you're ever listening to any kind of track that has binaural tones, it is designed to alter the frequency waves of your brain. So your brain naturally moves through different frequencies. That's how we have a state called hypnosis. So right now, if you're not in hypnosis, you're in a beta state of consciousness. As you begin to slow down those brain waves, you move into an alpha state of consciousness. That is hypnosis. Then you can move into a deeper state of hypnosis. That's called theta state of hypnosis. And you can go into an even deeper state called delta. And a lot of binaural tones will be tuned to these different levels. And so to your question on earbuds and headphones, you really only need to use that if there are binaural tones embedded on the track, and it will be listed on there. And if you can't use headphones or earbuds because it's just not comfortable, you'll still benefit from the track. You just won't get the binaural tone part. So on my tracks, like if I have a weight loss track, let's say it's Subliminal, and there are binaural tones, you would still get 90% of the benefit just listening to it in the background. So great question, thanks for asking it. Here is A Diamond, and A Diamond says, I'm just glad it worked. 16 weeks of full body radiation is tough, and success depends on how long you can endure it. I'm also very happy with the hospital was open to the idea of using hypnosis. Wow, that is so cool. So I'm assuming that while you were going through it, almost sounds like cancer treatment, that you were allowed to listen to some kind of hypnosis track, which is absolutely fantastic. Over the years I've been practicing, which is 14, I've had clients that used customized tracks I made for them when they were going into surgery. And the enlightened hospital personnel that allow for this use really are doing a favor, in my experience and what I've read in the literature, for their clients. Because the literature says that the operation times actually decrease, the complications, I believe, decrease, and most importantly, the amount of anesthesia requires decreases significantly, which means recovery is even faster. Harvard Medical School or Harvard University showed that if you use hypnosis in recovery from surgery, you recover 25% faster if you use hypnosis in just the recovery piece. And I've done some work, I live outside of Buffalo, New York, and I've done some work with the local football team here, the professional football team. And, you know, I can't for the life of me understand why they don't just bring in the ability to use this established scientific fact when they have an injury mid-season. How much are they paying these people? You know, when they get hurt, if they can bring them back one game earlier, what is that worth to you when your season is only 16 games long? Anyway, that's just my little cry in the wilderness right there. Let's just see if there's any other questions here. All right, so what I want to talk about now in the remaining time that we have is something I put in the little promo piece, and that is, how do you protect yourself against all this? Well, the first thing I would like to say is that the techniques are so sophisticated that there will be times, me included, when you have no idea what's going on. So there's going to be part of that I don't think we can just have a perfect ability to protect. In other words, some of the stuff is going to get through. But whatever you can be armed with, forewarned is forearmed, you know, that education here is really valuable. The first and most important thing I'm going to say, I want to make my most important point first. When people come to me and they say, oh man, there's this global thing going on. We all know what that is. I don't want to use the name because you can get in trouble for that on this platform and on other platforms. But there's this thing going on, and I feel like these people are having anxiety attacks, they're having panic attacks, their stress level has gone up. You know, what can I do? Okay, well, there's a number of things you can do, but the first thing that you can do, and this is going to tie back into everything we talked about, the first thing you can do is, if you're having these issues, stop consuming your news from visual and auditory sources. Meaning television, online, and online and whatnot. Instead, read it. Now you can obviously read online. It doesn't have to be a physical paper, but read it online. Why? Because most human communication is nonverbal. So as a propagandist, if I were one, I could shade a story by the images that I put alongside it. You know, imagine those ads I was talking about earlier, and instead of showing a beautiful beach with a happy-looking, healthy couple in their, excuse me, in their 50s, 60s, whatever, what if I put images of an inner city? And what if I put images of trash bins overflowing and little rats scurrying around? I could take out all of the side effects, but if I had that image, no one would buy the product. So if I wanted to influence people, I could simply show images on the screen that are consistent with my desired outcome. Because I get to choose what images I put there. I could also play music that is evocative of my desired outcome. Happy, sad, for example, right? Because music has the ability through frequency to affect our very moods. I could use my voice if I were the news reader, which I think is the right phrase to call them, which is what they call them in England. We call them newscasters, because they're just reading the news anyway. I could use my voice to sound very grave and very important. Or I could be kind of whimsical when I was talking about something. And that is going to color and influence how someone feels about whatever it is that's going on. So I could, like when you go to the movies, you can't do that right now, but when you go to the movies and you watch the coming attractions, it feels like an assault on your central nervous system. Boom, 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 boom. You can feel everything shaking. You can feel your body kind of vibrating and shaking. Well, you can use those kinds of sounds if you wanted to in a television news broadcast. And I found this unbelievable when I learned about it, but there's plenty of news programs especially that do a countdown. So they'll have these swirling images going, right? You're starting to focus in on those swirling images, your subconscious mind is. And they count down 10, 9, 8, 7. That's a hypnotic technique. With every number I count down, you're going to go deeper. That's straight out of hypnosis. And I'm not saying that they're using it for that purpose, but it's pretty interesting. It's also pretty interesting that they call television news, or excuse me, TV, they call it programming. That's fascinating. I think that's absolutely fascinating. And then another thing on the whole frequency thing, and feel free to research this, because I'd love it if somebody did a more in-depth look at it than I did. That supposedly, and I have a nephew who's a professional musician, and he confirmed this, that the note of A used to be tuned to 440 hertz. Excuse me, 432 hertz. And supposedly, during the 30s and 40s, the Nazis lobbied to have it changed from 432 hertz to 440 hertz. And sometime after the war in the 50s, that's what happened. The international musical community retuned all music from 432 hertz to 440 hertz. Why is this important? Well, think in your own experience. When you watch a horror movie, they're not playing usually bippy boppy music unless they want to drop the hammer on you, right? Get you kind of feeling safe and everything, and then something horrible happens. They use music that is sort of, and I'm not a musician, so please bear with me, is discordant. Creates feelings of alarm or maybe even panic inside of you, right? Because you're moving into a stress response. It's literally what's happening when you're sitting in the movie theater or you're watching TV and you're watching a horror film, and they're using visuals, they're using the voice, and then they're using music and sound effects, all to achieve that result. Well, here's the difference between 432 hertz and 440 hertz. And again, if somebody else wants to look into this and let me know, I think this would be awesome, because I've looked into it, but not super deep. There's something called the field of cymatics. C-Y-M-A-T-I-C-S, cymatics. And cymatics is basically taking sand, putting it on a thin sheet of metal, and then exposing that to sound, frequency, music. And what happens is that the sand begins to organize itself into patterns. This is very similar to the work of Dr. Masaru Emoto, who studied water and took pictures of water as it was thawing, as it was going from frozen to liquid. And the patterns that will be created on the sheet of metal by the sand that has moved itself around with 432 will be these beautiful symmetrical images. Absolutely beautiful, like a snowflake. This is what Emoto found, Dr. Emoto. With 440, it's slightly distorted, the way polluted water would look in a Masaru Emoto photograph. So what people are saying is that 432 is a healthy, healing, whole tone that affects your body, because your body is mostly water. Right? And your moods and your emotions are influenced by the frequency that is around you. Different if you're in the woods, or if you're in a war zone, or if you're in an inner city that is blighted. So the theory is that something was going on in order to sort of disrupt the population through this change from 432 to 440. Now, please do your own research. I don't want to say this is what it was, because the details I've found are a little sketchy, but the concept, I think, holds true, especially when you look into cymatics. So one of the things that I've been doing for the last year, as a matter of course, is that anytime I publish a video and it has music in it, which is probably 80% of the time, because the other 20% of the time might be rain or something, is I change it from 440 back to 432, because my understanding is that that is a whole healing tone. All right, so I think what we'll do is we'll just take the last little bit of time here and see if we have any other questions before we wrap it up and go to next week. Please remember to give me suggestions if there are topics that you would like to see, because I'd be happy to put that into the hat and start plugging that into the calendar if it kind of makes sense with the other content that I have in there. Let's see what we got here. Oh yeah, this is pretty interesting. AW says, the newscasters in this country use such a low, deep, slow tone of voice. It sounds a lot more factual and serious. Definitely. You know, the men still wear ties. Like I don't know many industries anymore where they wear ties, but they do. I had a friend that I grew up with, and he became a newscaster for a while, and he used to talk about how he didn't wear pants. Like he just had shorts on. You know, from the waist up, he was, you know, dressed professional and businesslike, but the waist down, it was like a joke. Flip-flops and shorts, and they're just reading off a screen. But yeah, it's a good point. They learn how to use their voice to create maximum influence. Let's see how. Let's do this one. MH, something I noticed today in the supermarket. I usually put my earphones in. This time I was in a hurry, so I didn't. They kept repeating announcements over and over to instill fear. Yes, yes. Okay, so check this out. When you feel fear, what it means is that you have moved your autonomic nervous system from the parasympathetic mode, which is also known as rest and digest, to the parasympathetic mode of fight or flight. When that happens, your thinking actually goes from the prefrontal cortex, the executive functions of your brain, the higher functions of your brain, to the lower functions of your brain, called the hind brain, or the R complex, which stands for reptilian part of your brain, that is only concerned with survival. Now, what I've learned recently through a pretty interesting guy out in the world, his name is Jason Christoff. He talks about how when we are frightened, when we move into that sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight mode of the nervous system, our hardwired instinct is to move toward the herd. We're pack animals. We're more like dogs than we are like cats. I'm sorry to cat lovers. I have a cat. I love cats. They're wonderful. But they're not really pack animals. Dogs are. We're more like dogs. And when you're frightened, moving towards the pack is hardwired because that's where safety is, or that's where our perception of safety is. Now, if you want to influence people and they are frightened, they are much more likely to listen, absorb, and ingest the words of authority when you repeat it. When everyone else is doing that, when the herd is doing that, that's the peer element. So yes, if you can instill fear in people, they automatically become more malleable in terms of influencing their minds. So awesome, thank you for bringing that up. That's really, really cool. Oh, and then there's one more thing I want to say, because I'm currently watching, let's see if we can get rid of this guy. I'm currently watching The Tutors on Netflix, and I'm embarrassed to say it because I actually watched like, whatever, 3 or 4 years ago, and I'm sort of rewatching it and speeding through parts because I loved it so much before, and I felt like I actually learned stuff. So in the time of the Tudors, which is Henry VIII, England, it's like 1535, 36, 1540, around that era. If you got out of line, you could be called a heretic in a religious sense. And the influence of religion and politics was probably much more powerful then than it is now. In fact, it was more powerful than it is now. And if you stepped outside of the orthodoxy of the church, if you stepped outside the mainstream, if you didn't stay with the herd, you could be called and accused of being a heretic. That's the word that they used. And they would sometimes execute people who were accused or tried and found guilty of being a heretic. Well, it seems to me that the modern equivalent of a heretic, the phrase that's used to push someone outside of that group and basically marginalize them and create an image in everyone else's mind of who they are, just like, oh, they're a heretic, well, of course they deserve to be burned, is a conspiracy theorist. A term that, if you investigate it, was created in the wake of John F. Kennedy's assassination in 1963 by the CIA in order to discredit people who questioned the official story. So on the one hand, you have safety in the herd. If I just say what everyone else is saying, if I wear what everyone else is wearing, if I think what everyone else is thinking, I will be safe. I won't be criticized, I won't be ostracized, and I sure as hell won't be burned at the stake. However, if I step outside of that and I get that label dropped on me, it has all of these other elements that come along with it because it's been programmed into our mind. You know, when you say conspiracy theorist to a person, they might think a nut job, a wacko, a lunatic, someone wearing a tinfoil hat, all these other things. And it automatically discredits someone just by using that phrase. So I think I'll leave it there for today. I haven't exactly figured out what next week is going to be, but I'll be putting out an email. So please sign up for my email list to my website, which is BlueSkyHypnosis.com. And also, if you haven't done it, please subscribe to my YouTube channel so you can get all the upcoming content. So I will send an email out to my email subscribers, and I will post something obviously on my channel that talks about what next Friday is. And keep those questions coming and keep those suggestions coming. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next Friday live at 5. Take care. Bye.